Ukraine just hit Russia, 2,000 kilometers away. The war has changed forever. Something happened last week that military experts said was impossible. A drone, launched from Ukrainian soil, flew past the front lines, past Moscow, past the Ural Mountains, and struck deep inside Siberia, 2,000 kilometers away. This wasn't a lucky shot, this was a message, and Russia has no answer for it. But here's what nobody is telling you. What does this mean for the next 90 days of this war? Welcome to the Professor Jiang Report, where complex world events are broken down clearly, honestly, and without the noise. It is wonderful to have you here today, and if this is your first time joining us, we would be truly honored if you hit that subscribe button. This channel is built for thoughtful viewers who want real analysis, not headlines. Before we go further, drop a comment below and let us know, where in the world are you watching from today? Your perspective matters, and this community is richer because of you. On June 21, 2026, something happened that stopped military experts around the world in their tracks. A Ukrainian drone flew across Russia, not just a few kilometers past the border, not just into occupied territory. It flew more than 2,000 kilometers, deep into the heart of Siberia, and struck an oil refinery in the Russian city of Tyumen. Let that sink in for a moment. Tyumen sits far beyond the Ural Mountains. For centuries, that mountain range was considered Russia's natural shield. During Napoleon's invasion in 1812, Russians fled behind the Urals to safety. During World War II, Soviet factories were moved there to keep them out of reach of Nazi bombers. No foreign weapon had ever reached that far inside Russia, until now. The drone that struck the Tyumen refinery was not a military weapon purchased from a foreign government. It was built in Ukraine by a Ukrainian company called Firepoint. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the strike publicly and made a point of naming the company. He wanted the world to know that Ukraine did this with its own hands, its own technology, and its own people. And he did not stop there. Zelensky told reporters that Ukrainian drones would soon be able to reach 3,000 kilometers and beyond. He said Ukraine knows exactly where Russia's military factories, oil storage facilities, and weapons plants are located, and that Ukraine intends to find them. But the Tyumen strike was not the only one. Just one day later, on June 22nd, Ukrainian drones struck two more critical targets deep inside Russia. The first was a weapons factory in Voronezh, a plant that produces components for Russian cruise missiles and Pantsir air defense systems. The second was a massive gas processing plant in Orenburg, located 1,200 kilometers from Ukraine. That single plant reportedly processes around 60% of the gas handled by Gazprom, Russia's state energy giant. It also produces helium used in rocket engines and ethane used in aircraft manufacturing. These were not random targets. Ukraine's military selected each one with precision. The goal was clear: to hit Russia where it hurts most, not just on the battlefield, but in its ability to produce weapons, fuel its military, and keep its economy running. On the same day, Ukrainian forces struck two Russian military satellite communication centers near Moscow. These centers help Russian forces spy on Ukrainian troop movements and coordinate attacks. Ukraine's military said the strikes critically damaged large communication antennas at both facilities. In a single week, Ukraine had reached Siberia, disrupted Russian energy production, damaged weapons factories, and blinded parts of Russia's military intelligence network. The rules of this war had changed, and Russia, for the first time, was feeling the war inside its own borders, far from the front line. For the past 4 years, there was an unspoken rule in this war. Ukraine fought back. Ukraine defended its cities. Ukraine pushed Russian forces off its land. But Ukraine largely kept its strikes close to the border, hitting supply lines, ammunition depots, and occupied territories within a certain range. That rule no longer exists. What Ukraine has done in the final weeks of June 2026 represents a fundamental shift in how this war is being fought. And to understand why it matters, it is important to understand what kind of weapons made it possible. The drones used in these strikes are not imported weapons. They are entirely Ukrainian-made. The company behind the Tyumen strike, Firepoint, is a Ukrainian defense technology firm that has been quietly developing long-range unmanned aerial vehicles for months. These are not the small commercial drones seen in early years of the conflict. These are precision-engineered weapons capable of navigating thousands of kilometers, avoiding radar detection, and hitting specific targets with calculated accuracy. Ukraine's President Zelensky Zelensky has been careful about how he speaks publicly about these weapons. He has not revealed technical specifications. He has not disclosed how many drones Ukraine possesses, but he has made one thing absolutely clear: Ukraine will keep using them, and the range will only grow. Now, the question many people are asking is this: is it legal? Under international humanitarian law, military strikes on energy infrastructure, weapons factories, and military communication facilities are considered lawful targets when they serve a direct military purpose. The Voronezh plant that was struck produces components for Russian cruise missiles, weapons that have been used repeatedly to attack Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure. The satellite communication centers near Moscow were actively being used to coordinate Russian military operations inside Ukraine. Legal analysts and military experts who have reviewed these strikes have largely concluded that Ukraine acted within the boundaries of international law. Russia, predictably, has called the strikes acts of terrorism. Russian state media described the Tyumen attack as an attack on civilian infrastructure. But independent analysts pointed out that the Tyumen refinery supplies fuel used by Russian military logistics operations, making it a legitimate military target under accepted rules of armed conflict. The response on the ground inside Russia has been significant. Following the strikes, the airport in Yekaterinburg, a major Ural city, was shut down at least 5 times due to drone alerts. Russian air defense units, which had been heavily concentrated near the front lines and around Moscow, are now being redeployed across a much wider area. Russia is being forced to defend an enormous territory that it never expected to need protecting. Belarus, Russia's close ally, made a surprising move. 4 drone guidance transponders located on Belarusian territory, which had been used to direct Russian drones toward Ukrainian cities, were quietly deactivated on June 22. Zelensky had publicly warned Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko days earlier that if Belarus did not remove those transponders, Ukraine would destroy them. Lukashenko chose to comply. That moment told the world something important. Even Russia's closest partner is beginning to calculate the cost of staying too close to Moscow in a war that is now reaching places no one expected. NATO allies have not publicly commented on Ukraine's long-range drone campaign in detail. However, behind closed doors, Western defense officials have reportedly expressed quiet admiration for Ukraine's growing domestic weapons capability, particularly its ability to develop and deploy precision strike technology without relying entirely on Western supply chains. As of late June 2026, Ukraine's drone campaign has logged over 500 separate attacks on Russian territory between May 1st and June 18th alone, according to French open-source analyst Clément Moulin, who tracked videos posted publicly online. That is not a campaign, that is a strategy, and it is working. When historians look back at this war, they may point to June 2026 as the month the balance shifted. Not because of a massive ground offensive, not because of a dramatic battlefield victory, but because Ukraine quietly, systematically, and with remarkable precision began dismantling the machinery that keeps Russia's war running from the inside. The consequences of this shift are being felt across multiple layers: military, economic, political, and psychological. And each layer tells a different story. Start with the military consequences. Russia has spent 4 years building a war machine designed for one purpose: to push forward into Ukrainian territory. Its supply lines run east to west, its logistics hubs are positioned to send ammunition, fuel, and equipment toward the front. Its air defense systems were concentrated around the front lines and the capital Moscow. That entire structure is now under threat. Ukraine's drone strikes have forced Russia to make an impossible choice. If Russia moves air defense units to protect its interior cities and energy facilities, the front lines become more vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. If Russia keeps those systems at the front, its oil refineries, weapons factories, and communication centers remain exposed to Ukrainian long-range drones. There is no clean solution to that problem. French open-source analyst Clément Moulin documented over 500 separate Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory between May 1st and June 18, 2026. Russian independent newspaper Meduza tracked 270 attacks on Russian trucks and logistics centers this year alone, noting that the median attack depth increased from a few kilometers to several tens of kilometers in just 2 months. Russia's ability to move weapons and supplies across its own territory is being degraded, and that degradation is beginning to show on the front line. Russia's rate of advance, which had already been slowing since late 2025, slowed further in May and June 2026. Military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War directly linked this slowdown to Ukraine's disruption of Russian rear logistics. Now consider the economic consequences. The strike on the Orenburg gas processing plant struck at the heart of Russia's energy economy. That single facility handles approximately 60% of Gazprom's gas processing operations. It produces helium used in rocket engines and ethane used in aircraft manufacturing. Disrupting that facility does not just hurt Russia's energy exports. It potentially slows down the production of the very weapons Russia is using in this war. The Tyumen refinery strike added further pressure on Russia's already strained fuel supply chains. Russia's economy has been operating under severe Western sanctions since 2022. Energy revenue has been its primary lifeline. Every refinery that goes offline, even temporarily, chips away at that lifeline. The Economist estimated that energy blackouts caused by Russian attacks on Ukraine have already cut Ukrainian economic growth by 2.5 percentage points in 2026. Ukraine is now returning that pressure, targeting the energy infrastructure that funds and fuels Russia's military operations. The political consequences are equally significant. Inside Russia, the psychological impact of these strikes is impossible to ignore. For Russian citizens living thousands of kilometers from Ukraine, the war had always felt distant, something happening far away on the television screen, in a place called Donbass that most ordinary Russians could barely locate on a map. That distance is gone now. When drones fly over Yekaterinburg and the airport shuts down, ordinary Russian citizens feel the war in a way they never did before. When a gas plant in Orenburg erupts in flames, workers and families in that city understand that this conflict has consequences they cannot simply watch from a safe distance. Russian independent analysts and opposition voices, many operating from exile, have noted a shift in public mood inside Russia. Desertion requests among Russian soldiers have been rising in parallel with the stalling of Russia's advance. Ivan Chuvalyaev of Idait Lesom, a group that assists Russian soldiers in fleeing the war, told Al Jazeera that the longer the advance stalls, the more desertion requests they receive. From a global perspective, Ukraine's drone campaign has sent a message to every government watching this conflict. A country that is outgunned, outmanned, and fighting for its survival can still develop the technology and strategy to strike back effectively if it invests in innovation, protects its defense industry, and refuses to accept the role of passive victim. That message is being heard in capitals far beyond Europe. So here is where things stand right now, and here is where they are heading. Ukraine has demonstrated something that even its closest allies did not fully anticipate. It has built its own long-range strike capability, deployed it with precision, and used it to reach targets that Russia considered permanently safe. The Ural Mountains are no longer a shield, Siberia is no longer out of reach, and the factories, refineries, and communication centers that Russia depends on to fight this war are now within Ukraine's grasp. But what happens next? That is the question every military analyst, every diplomat, and every government watching this conflict is now asking. And the answers point in several important directions. First, watch the battlefield in Donbass closely over the next 60 to 90 days. Russia has been slowly advancing in the Donetsk region, with its forces pushing toward the city of Kostiantynivka, but that advance is happening at an increasingly costly pace. Ukraine's disruption of Russian rear logistics means that ammunition, fuel, and reinforcements are harder to move to the front line. If Ukraine's drone campaign continues at its current intensity, military analysts expect Russia's already slow rate of advance to slow even further, or potentially stall completely in certain sectors. Second, watch what happens with peace negotiations. As of late June 2026, both sides are publicly saying they are open to talks, but the gap between their positions remains enormous. Russia is demanding that Ukraine withdraw from Donbass, accept neutrality, and abandon any path toward NATO membership. Ukraine has rejected each of those conditions clearly and consistently. Meanwhile, the United States, European leaders, and NATO allies are all pushing for a negotiated settlement, but none of them are willing to pressure Ukraine into accepting terms that would compromise its sovereignty. The upcoming NATO summit in Ankara is being watched carefully. Politico has reported that the biggest disagreements at that summit are expected to center on Ukraine. Specifically, what security guarantees NATO members are willing to offer Kyiv as part of any future peace arrangement. Those discussions will shape the diplomatic landscape for the remainder of 2026. Third, watch Russia's domestic situation. The combination of military setbacks, rising desertion rates, economic pressure from energy infrastructure strikes, and a population increasingly aware that the war is reaching their own cities, creates a fragile internal environment inside Russia. History shows that wars which come home to ordinary citizens in the form of fuel shortages, factory closures, airport shutdowns, and military losses eventually produce political consequences. How and when those consequences emerge inside Russia remains one of the most closely watched questions in global geopolitics right now. Now, this is the moment to hear from you. Here at the Professor Jiang Report, the conversation does not end when the script does. The viewers who watch this channel are thoughtful, informed, and engaged, and their perspectives genuinely matter. So consider these questions and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Ukraine's long-range drone campaign will be enough to change the outcome of this war? Or does a negotiated settlement remain the only realistic path to peace? If Russia's domestic pressure continues to build, how do you think Putin's government will respond? With compromise or with further escalation? And perhaps most importantly, what responsibility do Western governments have in shaping the outcome of this conflict, and are they doing enough? There are no simple answers to any of those questions, but asking them honestly and thinking about them carefully is exactly the kind of engagement that this channel is built for. For viewers who want to stay informed on this story as it develops, the most reliable sources to follow include the Institute for the Study of War, which publishes daily battlefield assessments, the Kyiv Independent for on-the-ground reporting from Ukraine, Al Jazeera's international coverage for a global perspective, and Reuters for verified breaking developments. These are the sources the Professor Jiang Report draws from, and they are the ones that will keep you accurately informed as this story continues to evolve. The war in Ukraine is now in its 5th year. It has already reshaped European security, global energy markets, international alliances, and the rules of modern warfare. What happened in June 2026, a single drone flying 2,000 kilometers into the heart of Russia, did not end this war, but it changed the terms of it in ways that will echo long after the fighting eventually stops. Because when a country the size of Ukraine can reach Siberia with a weapon it built itself, the world has to ask a much bigger question. What else is possible? And who else is watching and learning? This is the Professor Jiang Report, where the story does not stop at the headline, and where every development is one piece of a much larger picture that you deserve to understand fully, clearly, and honestly. Thank you for watching, thank you for thinking, and the Professor Jiang Report will see you in the next one.